Beyond fear itself. A healthy relationship with fear. Beyond fear itself. Fear is a powerful part of life. Fear is a powerful word and a powerful emotional experience. It is a powerful motivator, like to move away from something, as well as an instrument of power, including in human social groups. People can be frightened into doing certain things or into stopping or avoiding certain activities. A few versions of fear are fright, terror, and horror. These are common responses to powerful forces such as natural disasters and the violence of military technology like bombs, or hoses with huge amounts of water coming out very quickly with high pressure. Those kind of hoses that have been used to spray at people. Well, that would be frightening, don't you think? Really loud sounds. Sirens, they're designed to frighten you or startle you enough so that you pay attention to the flashing lights and the loud noises of the ambulance coming through and stuff. Other things that are produce responses to fear commonly would be the violence of creatures like sharks and alligators, and even wasps, and of course humans. We may fear things like sudden noises, sudden loud noises, and the physical sensation of falling. We may fear physical pain, as well as social rejection, criticism, condemnation, punishment, exclusion, being driven away or kicked out of a particular group. So fear is one possible way of relating to something. Here are some common ways of relating to fear. Number one, fear it. This way of relating to fear is promoted in the saying, the only thing to fear is fear itself. This way of relating is not just about avoiding things that we fear, such as acting in response to fear so as to avoid or retreat away from the immediate trigger of fear. This is about fearing fear itself, as in a state of persistent or even constant distress, anxiety, angst, paranoia, even hysteria. So any arising of fear may be, when someone fears fear, then any arising of fear may be hidden in shame, so as to minimize the possibility of other people recognizing fear and being aggressive towards one perceived as vulnerable for displaying fear. So another way of relating to fear would be to pretend that it does not exist. Number two. Or pretend that it's not happening is more precisely what I meant. In some cases, people may present for public perception the quality of being completely fearless, or at least without fear in regard to some particular issue. It's considered socially shameful to display fear. So we pretend that it doesn't exist, which is an extension of fearing it. That's why we would pretend it doesn't exist. Obviously, pretending that fear does not exist is a tremendous concern for public perception. It's evidences a great concern for public perception, as in a fear of social disapproval. So out of fear for social disapproval, we fear displaying fear. We might even pretend it does not exist. Another thing we might do, another way of relating to fear, is to compensate for it. Again, as a response to fear, from fear, in fear, of fear, there may be methods and strategies designed to portray the absence of fear, or to convey that any fear that may be present is irrelevant, like, yeah, I'm afraid, but, I'm going to do it anyway. When one fears being socially identified as afraid, or more specifically as vulnerable, one may be so afraid that one is motivated to present evidence of one's courage in particular, and of one's social value in general. And that can be quite adaptive. That makes a lot of sense, right? We compensate, yes, I'm afraid, but I'm also very skillful, I'm very useful, I'm courageous even though I'm afraid. Or I'm clever enough to do risky behaviors and compensate for vulnerability or fear. That's one way of relating to fear. Number 4 is to hysterically criticize it. To hysterically criticize fear. If one's own fear is rather obvious, but one wishes to distract others from one's own fear, because it could attract social disapproval, and wishes to portray oneself as being anti-fear in accord with some social norm, then other people's fear can be hysterically criticized, condemned, ridiculed, and shamed. Realistically, all of the above 4 ways of relating to fear are fearing fear. Out of the fearing of fear itself, one may pretend it does not exist. Out of the fearing of fear itself, one may attempt to compensate for it with some great act of courage or evidence of valiance. Elements of valor. Evidence of valor. That's it. One form of compensating for fear is to attack other people for their fearing, to ridicule them, to condemn them for their fearing. It distracts people from our own anxiety and fear. Or it might. So attacking others for their fearing can be in many forms. Condemnation of fear is formed in language like this. They should not have blank manifested whatever symbol of fear. Instead, they should have blank manifested whatever symbol of courage or valor or value or validity or worth. Note that all instances of condemnation may ultimately be condemnation of fear or of symbols of fear, like sin. What is sin? It's something we fear. The consequences of sin we fear. It's about fear. What's another symbol of fear? The devil. Criminal activity. Running away, like retreating, withdrawing. Fighting back. That's a symbol of fear, especially in desperation. Right? Screaming for help, clearly a symbol of fear. Asking for help could be perceived as a symbol of fear. Even thinking about asking for help. Is related to fear. Fear is normal, fear is natural. But we may fear social disapproval so much that we hide fear, that we compensate for it, that we condemn others for it to distract from our own fear and anxiety. We may even blame others. And when we blame others, we're blaming symbols that we fear. We're using other people as symbols of ideas that we fear. We're blaming those people as if they were just the ideas that we fear. And we do fear those people when we're doing that. So blaming fear is formed in language like this. If they would or would not have done blank, manifested whatever symbol of fear, whatever thing we fear, then the following results would or would not have emerged. So it's like a justification. Well, justification comes later. It's blaming a result on if they would have done blah blah blah, or if they would not have done blah blah blah, then I wouldn't have had this anxiety and this horrible, dreadful, dreadful, terrifying, horrible, like a horror movie, horrible situation that I have. This negative situation that I have, this frightening situation. So if people are using that kind of phrasing, they're talking about horror, fear, anxiety. They may not use those words, but that's the nature of the relating. So again, note that all instances of blame may ultimately be blaming of fear or symbols of fear. Sin. We're blaming sin. Another symbol of fear, the devil. We blame the devil. Criminal activity, running away, like fleeing, like fight or flight response, could be fighting back, withdrawing, retreating, being quiet, being too passive. These are the kind of things that people blame or condemn. Screaming for help, that could be blamed. People could be blamed and condemned for screaming for help, for evidencing their fear, for asking for help, not screaming, just asking. No, that's shameful. How about thinking about asking for help? Well, all of those things can be targeted for blame or condemnation. Because if there's a social disapproval of fear in general, that means that there's no room or space or valuing of someone's fear. People don't want to hear about it. People don't want to receive it. People don't want to address it. People don't want to get present to fear, except if they are open to, or willing to, or even eager to get present to fear. Scapegoating, the same target of blame, for extended periods of time is known as resentment, or holding a grudge. It comes from fear. Attacking other people, blaming them, condemning them, scapegoating them, it's all processes of fear, activities relating to fear, derived from fear. So there are also defensive justifications for one's own actions. These justifications defend actions. Could be inaction, but typically defend action. And what did they defend the action from? From a feared attack. Typically a verbal attack, but it could be some other kind of attack. If people justify to defend their actions from a feared attack by a perceived possible threat. I'm defending why I did or didn't do a certain thing with the expectation of criticism, attack, social disapproval, that kind of thing. So I use a past reference to explain, and why am I doing explaining? Because I want to attract social approval, as in moral support. I want to build up my defenses against an expected attack. So I'm defensive because I'm expecting an attack. Nothing wrong with that. Totally logical. Just something that people may do. In language, these defensive justifications are formed like this. Because of blank. That's the only reason that I blank. Otherwise I would never do something like that, because of course I'm not that kind of person. So that's a defensive justification. Of course, these defensive justifications can be applied to possible future activity, not things that have already happened, such as, because of blank, that is what we must do, and here's what we must do, and that's why it would be okay, justified, acceptable, right in this situation, because of that other circumstance. So, because of whatever, here's what we must do, here's what we should do, here's what we could do. Those are all defensive justifications of a possible future activity, and the defensiveness goes along with a fear that someone may criticize or condemn the proposed action. All defensive justifications, whether they're quiet, whether they're only thought of and not even said out loud, if I just am justifying it within myself, for myself, or if I'm shouting it out in rage and posting it on the internet and so on, all defensive justifications arise from fear of social rejection, fear of punishment, and the fear of the loss of access to rewards or privileges or opportunities or other benefits available through social relationships. That means we have value in social relationships if we're doing defensive justification as just as an indication that we value keeping something, and also that we value avoiding some particular consequence. So this brings us to another possible way of relating to fear. Number 5, hysterically defend it or justify it. The fear itself. Yeah, but I have a good reason to be anxious, afraid, angry, resentful, defensive, etc. That's the kind of thing. We don't normally say it that directly, but I have a good reason to be whatever, to do whatever, and so on. That's the whole nature of justification and defensiveness. Again, consider that fear includes these subcategories: defensiveness, anxiety, worry, antagonism, Resentment, anguish is a kind of fear also, and perhaps even grief. We're afraid of going on and being independent, and grief is like a form of terror in a certain way. So those are the kinds of patterns that people may justify or defend. They may maintain grief or anxiety or anguish or resentment because they have good reasons and they have good justifications typically in the past, right? So people may defend or justify their fears or their worries or the various branches that grow from the trunk of fear of social stigma, the fear of social stigma. So let me rephrase that. Various kinds of fear, like anxiety and defensiveness and anguish, grow from the trunk of the fear of social stigma. So from the fear of social stigma arise resentment, defensiveness, condemnation, antagonism, anguish, worry, grief. That's all concerns. They all can relate back to concerns to avoid social stigma, of fear of social stigma. So any justifying or any defending of the past or of a possible future could be or would be rooted in fear of social stigma. I'm saying consider that it always is rooted in social stigma. Whenever we're justifying or defending, that's rooted in a fear of social stigma. That's how powerful social stigma is, or the concern for social stigma, how much we value avoiding it, is that we would justify future activities, justify the past, defend explanations for why we're going a certain course of action or why we're considering taking a course of action, why we did something we've done. We like to justify and defend in order to promote the avoidance of social stigma. So we'll look at resentment. For instance, people practice resentment to avoid the social stigma of acknowledging any personal responsibility for particular results. I resent other people. I blame them. They're the one, I can maintain that blame. That becomes resentment. They're the ones responsible for the results that I got, that I'm getting. That's to avoid social stigma of responsibility, of acknowledging my responsibility, and really of acknowledging the results themselves. I'm avoiding directly looking at the results by blaming and resenting other people for producing those results, allegedly. So it's not that it can't be true, by the way, that other people might have contributed those results, but it's not facing the results, it's not being responsible for them, it's jumping from any reference to the results right off to, oh, well, it was other people's faults. Why? To avoid social stigma. It makes perfect sense. Another example is practicing of anguish. People might practice anguish to avoid the social stigma from taking new risks, which brings the possibility of failing. So I just languish and anguish, just paralysis of analysis. Just practice kind of a hysterical interior dialogue to avoid social stigma from taking risks. Each branch of fear is designed to avoid or reduce a feared possible social stigma. Note that defending and justifying may also be condemned and ridiculed. But that is just more fear-based reaction to avoid social stigma. I say, look at how afraid those people are. And if I'm saying that as a condemnation or to ridicule them, that's itself the spirit of fear, or the language of fear. I'm ridiculing their fear. I can be ridiculing their defense. Look at how defensive those people are. If I say that with the antagonism, that's just still more fear. Condemnation, justification, defensiveness, ridicule, all of those things arise from fear of social stigma. And even, this is interesting, I just noticed this isn't in the written portion of the blog, social stigmatizing is also an expression of fear. When I say social stigmatizing, I mean ridiculing and punishing stuff. That's an expression of fear, or it could be. Generally speaking, social stigmas are reactive, reflexive, mechanical, automatic. They just reflex out of fear. We say, oh, don't wear brown with don't wear that shirt with those shoes. It's reflexive. It's automatic. It's condemnation. Oh, I'm going to laugh. I laugh at you for wearing that shirt with those shoes, or just for wearing those shoes in general. Whatever. That's the motion of fear. Now, it can be done with the spirit of kind of fun, making fun of someone, literally in a way of bonding with them and having fun. But ridicule, outright ridicule, well, that's a different thing. That's to produce fear in another person from one's own fear. It's like, I've got fear, I'm going to make them afraid too. I'm going to ridicule them for wearing that shirt or those shoes or whatever. So, we now get to a new way of relating to fear. The sixth alternative in my list of 6. Practice it. Practice fear. Fear is a normal part of human experience. Accept it. Value it. Explore it. You can perceive fear in yourself and use caution. You can perceive fear in others and recognize the various branches of fear arising, such as arrogance and hysterical, terrified anti-negativity. Just this kind of paranoia of, oh my God, somebody said a complaint. We need to condemn them for condemnation. That great hypocrisy, right? So we can just notice that. Fear, and perceive it arising in myself and others. We can be cautious of relying on others who demonstrate fear in relation to a particular subject or a particular proposal, or maybe they're afraid of fear itself, and we can, it's very evident to us. We notice that, okay, that's a person who's afraid of fear, like as a religion. And act accordingly. Be cautious about relying on that person to be courageous, because they're wallowing in anguish. They're afraid of fear. They have a hysterical paranoia going on in greater or lesser degrees. So we can also use fear to influence others. You can present symbolic fears, as in threatening ideas or threatening symbols, to other people so as to interrupt them, to slow them down, and to drive them away, to sort them out, sort the courageous ones from the easily frightened ones, if that's of interest, if that's of value. So in fact, whether you think to frighten others intentionally or not, whether I try to or not, it's nearly inevitable that someone will eventually perceive me or you as a threat and be frightened of you or something that they think that you might do or might say. And perhaps it's inevitable that people will condemn you and ridicule you. Why? To test your response to their attempts to intimidate you or to threaten your confidence and your courage. They want to find out how much confidence you have. How do you respond to intimidated accusations and stuff like that? So those that fear their own authority may instinctively challenge other people's authority. Why? To identify who they can trust, who is confident within their own authority. Other people want to know that. How they find out? They accuse you of being untrustworthy. You don't think for yourself. Or you are too anxious and you don't take bold, courageous action. If someone makes accusations like that and you start to defend and you kind of shrink back and you're, yes, I do, right? And you have that defensive justification. Well, I only did that because of da-da-da-da. I was afraid, right? Well, generally speaking, people recognize the thinness of those excuses and rationalizations and justifications. Sometimes people are convinced. Some people are convinced by them. Some people are not persuaded and they see through them. So those that fear their own fear may instinctively challenge other people's courage to assess reactions for confidence, especially when a person has no familiarity with how to assess competence relating to a particular subject, and therefore can only assess confidence as in sincerity and integrity. Here's an example. I don't know much about repairing cars. I go to somebody who is boasting about their capacity to repair cars. If they're boasting, that's an indication that they might not be really confident because they're boasting. So I might challenge them in some indirect way, just to notice how do they respond when I challenge them in this indirect way. What if I give them some compliments? Do they really get, you know, spun off and distracted by my compliments and go on telling about how great they are and so forth? How do they respond to compliments? How do they respond to accusations? How do they respond to criticisms? These are natural things to consider. So again, in regard to like the capacity of somebody to do auto repair, let's say I'm not good enough at it to even identify, I don't know what the things are called. I don't know how to assess someone's competence, but I can assess their confidence. I can indirectly, I can even ask them to describe past situations. I can give them a straight, direct question. Are you really good at, auto repair? And watch for not just what they say, but how they say it, how their body responds, every part of their response, not just their words, not just their tone of voice, everything. So there's a variety of questions people could use to assess someone's confidence. I just don't know how to assess their competence. I'm not a good enough auto mechanic, maybe. So what I do maybe is to assess their competence. It doesn't mean that they are, that they are competent just because they're confident. They may be really naive. But, if they're defensive about how great they are, then they're probably not very confident, right? They're probably afraid of failing and afraid of social disapproval, and I can relate to that. Now, accusations of insincerity may be tests for confidence and sincerity. How do people respond to an accusation of insincerity? Accusations of dishonesty may be tests for confidence and honesty. Accusations may be tests. Do you fear accusations? Do you fear tests? Do you fear challenges? Do you fear blame? Do you fear ridicule? Do you feel persecution? Do you fear other people resenting you? Do you fear being trusted? Do you fear not being trusted? Would that be an insult to your persona and your social identity? Would it be shameful if someone doesn't trust you? Do you fear assessments of your competence? Do you fear people indirectly assessing your confidence? Maybe they don't have enough familiarity to assess your competence, so they assess your confidence. Do you fear that possibility, that they might assess your confidence? Do you condemn accusations? Do you condemn fear? Do you condemn condemnation? Do you condemn arrogance? Do you reactively condemn anything? Do you say things like, it's evil, it's horrifying, it's disturbing, it's disgusting, it's frightening, it's terrifying, it's socially vilified, it's labeled with a social stigma? Do you say it straight? Do you say it with a reactive distress? Do you say it with condemnation and fear? So consider that you condemn what you fear, and that you fear what you condemn. This could be a good thing to know. Now, while it's not obvious from any of the content above, I recognize that a major factor contributing to this article has been my years of research into economic trends, in particular into what we might call bear market trends, or decreases in spending, decreases in borrowing, decreases in economic activity, increasing of government interventions and government control and government regulations and restrictions. Those are economic trends, or trends of behavior with particular purposes in mind, economic purposes in mind. I'm categorizing all of politics as a subcategory of economics. All of politics is in order to promote certain economic interests. That's my presumption. So some students of trends, some students of economics and so forth, study naive optimism as a particular target of study, and also study fearful paranoia, even hysteria, panic. They study mania and panic. Mania being naive optimism and excess, high risk, and panic being, not just conservatism, but just hysterical avoidance of all risk, or all perceived risk. So the group of folks who study that is called socionomists. Their field is called socionomy, or socionomics, actually. Socionomics. And we socionomists, which is just a particular group of forecasters and analysts, we specifically study trends of naive optimism and fearful paranoia and the alternation between the two, the waves, the cycles. And I've been afraid of some of the things that I found in my research. When I, in 2004, assessed the fuel prices in the U.S. and Europe and the natural consequences of those rising fuel prices as gasoline rose $4 and $5 a gallon in the U.S. and $10 and $11 per gallon in parts of Europe. Well, there were some natural consequences that were obvious by 2004 as to how it would go. And so I wrote about how credit markets would shift, how real estate lending patterns would shift, how pricing would shift for real estate for certain stock sectors and stock markets in general. A whole set of things. So there's been a lot of somewhat frightening things that I've researched. That's been a big part of my life since 2002 when I started to research economic trends with a particular, enthusiasm and eagerness. I may have had some interest in some study of it long ago, but I'm not counting any of that. I was more studying economic principles in the early 90s. In 2002, I started to actually study trends. So I found some frightening things that were frightening to me, and things that were frightening to other people too. I've encountered lots of fearful reactions to my analysis and sharing. In 2004, 2003, 2002, I've been talking about some of the things coming. Many people that have since happened or that are coming in the future still, many people would be frightened by those things, or should be if they actually were to, understand what I'm talking about. They should be frightened based on their current positions and investments and models of reality. They should be frightened into caution and conservatism and adjustment and learning. That's when I say they should be. Eventually they will be. Put it that way. So there have been lots of fearful reactions to my analysis. Dismissal, condemnation, defensiveness, and of course there's been interest and argument against it as well, with people defending their presumptions. But there's also been receptivity and interest and adjustments that people have made and benefits that they've received, tremendous value in some cases. But in many cases, people did not adjust, so they did not benefit. They lost hundreds of thousands of dollars by doing high-risk real estate speculation or investing in really overpriced stocks that they didn't know were really overpriced. So they underestimated risk. Fear and risk are related. I'm going to comment a little bit more on defensiveness, and then that'll be the end of this. One of my favorite forms of defensiveness has been people saying things like this. I want to stick with my investments that are safe, the ones I already have. Therefore, I'm going to concentrate in, or stay concentrated into, highly leveraged real estate speculation based on borrowed money. This would be someone's justification or defense of why they want to stay in real estate, because they presume it's safe, or they insist that it's safe even. They defend it as the safest thing to do. Is that accurate? Have they actually looked at any information? What else do they justify? Because they presume it to be safe? Well, they'll keep holding a few stocks that have already recently lost 50% quickly. So therefore, people may presume that by now those stocks must be safe because they recently lost 50% quickly. Well, I don't happen to agree with that logic. I think that any system that produces someone quickly losing 50% and being surprised by it is not safe. And it would be prudent and beneficial to consider alternatives that might be more reliable. If somebody is, involved in something that they know is high risk and loses 50% quickly, well, they don't blame other people. They don't justify it. They don't say, oh, it was the economy, it was the politicians, it was my neighbor, it was the storm. Somebody who knows that what they're doing involves risk and knows the amount of risk that's involved, if they don't have a great result, they don't say it's not gambling. They knew it was gambling. They knew it was risky. They don't justify it. They don't defend it. They take the losses and they move on. They learn from their losses. All right, so those who are afraid to make fear an ally will never know the benefits of that ally. Those who are afraid to make fear an ally will never know the benefits of that ally. And this, again, is a continuing principle of my theme of the one-eyed king who rules the land of the blind. In the land of the blind, where people are afraid of fear and close their eyes so as to avoid saying things that frighten them, a man who opens even one eye is king, because he will see things that no one else sees. He will have, like a sixth sense, an amazing, mysterious, to other people, a mysterious, prophetic sensitivity, perception. In the land of the blind, where people close their eyes, terrified and horrified of the unknown, the one who is willing to open their eyes at least occasionally, and who's not blinded by the brightness of the sun when they open their eyes, the one who can see a little bit, is willing to see, and has developed some distinctions to be able to perceive fear and safety accurately. Fear is their ally. Courage is also their ally, and without fear, there's no real courage. Hope you enjoyed listening to this. Feel free to share this with your friends through Facebook or by reblogging it and so on. This has been Beyond Fear Itself, a healthy relationship with fear.